It was a quiet evening on the Harper farm. John Harper had spent most of the day tending to his crops and checking on his livestock. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting a warm golden light across the fields. The wind was calm, and the only sound was the occasional call of a bird or the rustling of leaves in the breeze. John had lived alone on this farm for years now. His small homestead was far from town, tucked away in a valley surrounded by hills. He preferred it that way. It gave him peace. His days were simple, filled with hard work, but there was no one around to disturb him. He didn't mind the loneliness. In fact, he welcomed it. But today, something felt different. As John walked back from the barn to the house, his eyes caught something unusual in the tall grass near the creek. At first, he thought it was just an animal, perhaps a deer or a rabbit. But as he drew closer, he realized it was a person. John's heart skipped a beat. It was a young girl no older than 16 lying face down in the grass. Her clothes were torn and her hair was wild and matted with dirt. She was barely moving. John rushed over, his boots crunching the dry earth beneath him. Kneeling beside her, he could see that she was hurt. There were cuts on her arms and legs, and she had bruises on her face. John's first thought was that she must have been attacked by someone. He didn't know if she was from the nearby town or if she was lost, but he couldn't leave her there. "Hey, are you okay?" he asked softly, though he knew she was too weak to answer. Gently, he turned her over, trying to check her injuries. Her eyes fluttered open, and she stared up at him in confusion as if not sure whether to trust him. "I'm going to help you," John said, his voice calm and reassuring. "I'm not going to hurt you." The girl looked at him for a long moment, still unsure of what to make of him. John had never seen anyone quite like her before. Her skin was darker than that of the settlers in the area, and her features were different, more native. I need help," she whispered, barely audible. Her voice trembled as she spoke, and John could tell that she was frightened. "Don't worry. I'll get you inside and take care of you," John replied. He gently lifted her into his arms and carried her back to his house. Once inside, he laid her down on the small cot by the fire. He grabbed a towel and soaked it in warm water, then began cleaning her wounds. She winced at the pain but didn't cry out. John worked carefully, making sure not to hurt her any more than she already was. As he cleaned her injuries, he asked her questions, but she barely answered. She was exhausted and clearly in shock. All John knew for sure was that she was alone, hurt, and in need of help. After a while, she fell into a fitful sleep, and John sat by the fire, deep in thought. Who was she? Why was she out there alone? And what had happened to her? He didn't know the answers, but one thing was certain. He couldn't just turn her away. He didn't know who she was or where she came from, but he couldn't leave a young girl to suffer out in the wilderness. The fire crackled and popped in the hearth, casting long shadows on the walls. John sat there, his mind racing with questions, but there was one thing he was sure of. He had done the right thing by helping her. He couldn't have lived with himself if he had ignored her cry for help. The night grew darker and the wind picked up outside. John heard the occasional rustle of the trees, but other than that, the world seemed still. John's eyes drifted back to the girl lying on the cot. She was peaceful now, her breathing steady. She had stopped shivering and her face no longer looked so pale. She was resting, recovering from whatever ordeal she had been through. John went to the small cabinet and pulled out a blanket, laying it gently over her. He couldn't help but wonder who would come looking for her. She didn't seem like a settler girl. Her appearance was different, and the way she acted was not like anyone he had met in the town. As he stared into the fire, John felt a strange sense of unease. His simple life on the farm had always been peaceful, but now, with this girl in his home, he felt like things were changing. The girl was in his care now, and that meant responsibility. He didn't know what the future held or who might come looking for her, but he would protect her for as long as he could. But as he drifted off to sleep that night, a nagging thought lingered in his mind. What if someone was looking for her already? What if the people she had been running from were closer than he thought? John didn't know it yet, but his life was about to change in ways he couldn't have imagined. The quiet, solitary existence he had known for so long would soon be tested in ways he could never have prepared for. The days that followed were filled with a strange quiet. John had always enjoyed solitude, but now, with the injured girl in his care, his life felt different. It wasn't that he resented her presence, far from it. but he could not ignore the feeling of unease that had settled deep in his chest. She was an Apache girl, a member of a tribe that was often seen as enemies by the settlers around him. What would they think if they found out he was harboring her? What would they do to him? John tried to push those thoughts aside. He had made a choice when he found her lying in the creek, and he would stand by it. He could not, in good conscience, turn his back on someone who needed help, no matter the consequences. Tala, for her part, had said little. She had been grateful, of course, but her silence was something more than just the pain of her wounds. There was something distant about her, something that made John wonder what she had been through before she arrived at his farm. He had tried to speak with her, but her answers were always short, her voice barely above a whisper. She seemed scared to trust him, and he understood why. John wasn't sure how to bridge the gap between them. He wasn't used to dealing with people, let alone people from a different world. His entire life had been spent working the land, living among settlers who shared his views, his lifestyle. Tala was different, and though he admired her quiet strength, he couldn't help but feel a growing distance between them. She wasn't just from a different world, she was a stranger in his, someone who belonged to a culture he didn't fully understand. Still, he did his best to care for her. He made sure she had plenty of water and food. He cleaned her wounds every day, watching her flinch with pain as he tended to her, though she never complained. Slowly, she started to recover, but she still avoided eye contact with him most of the time. The fear in her eyes never fully faded. Days turned into a week, and the tension in the air only grew. John was beginning to worry about what would happen if someone came looking for Tala. He didn't know what the rules were in situations like this. Was he supposed to send her back to her people, or was he obligated to protect her? The settlers wouldn't understand if they found out, and he feared what might happen if they did. One evening, as John was finishing his work in the fields, he heard a soft cry in the distance. At first, he thought it was the wind or an animal, but when he heard it again, louder this time, he knew it was Tala. His heart raced. Without thinking, he dropped his tools and ran toward the house. He found her sitting outside near the small creek that ran alongside his property. She was trembling, her arms wrapped tightly around her knees as she stared at the ground. Her face was pale and her eyes were wide with fear. "Tala," John called softly, approaching her cautiously. "What's wrong? Are you hurt?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked up at him with those deep, fearful eyes. She was breathing hard, and for a moment, John thought she might say something, but then she shook her head, her face filled with terror. "They are coming," she whispered hoarsely, her voice barely audible. "I feel them. They are watching me." John froze. He had been expecting this moment, but hearing her say it out loud made the fear in his chest grow even more. He hadn't been sure if she was just scared of her past or if something more immediate was going on. But now, with her words hanging in the air, he knew the danger was real. "Who's coming?" John asked, though he already had a sinking feeling in his stomach. "Who's watching you?" "The Apache," Tala replied, her voice trembling. "The ones who were chasing me before. They will find me and they will take me back. I cannot go back to them. I cannot." John knelt beside her, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "You're safe here," he said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "You don't need to worry about them. I won't let them take you." Tala shook her head, her eyes filled with desperation. "You don't understand. They will find me. They always do. I can't hide from them." John felt a pang of sympathy. He had never been in a situation like this before. He had no idea what the Apache were like, what they would do if they found her here. But one thing was certain. He couldn't let her face that fear alone. "We'll figure something out," John said, trying to offer comfort. "You don't have to go anywhere. Stay here with me. You're safe." Tala seemed to calm down a little, but John could tell she wasn't entirely convinced. She still looked at him with that same distrust, as if she expected him to betray her, to turn her away at the first sign of trouble. He couldn't blame her. After everything she had been through, trust was something she could no longer afford to give easily. That night, as John lay in bed, he couldn't sleep. The thought of the Apache coming for Tala kept him awake. He knew that they would be a threat to both of them. He didn't know if he could fight them off if they came. He wasn't a soldier. He was just a farmer, a man who had spent most of his life working the land and living quietly. But he also knew that he couldn't just send Tala away. He had promised to protect her, and he meant to keep that promise no matter what. The following morning, John decided he had to do something. He couldn't wait any longer, hoping that the Apache would simply forget about Tala. He needed to take action. He spent the entire day preparing for the worst. He strengthened the locks on the doors, checked the windows, and made sure the barn was secure. He even considered leaving, taking Tala with him and running far away, but he knew that wasn't a realistic option. If the Apache were after her, they would find her no matter where he went. That evening, as the sun began to set, John heard the distant sound of horses approaching. His heart leapt into his throat. He froze, listening intently. The sound was faint but unmistakable. They were coming. John quickly grabbed a rifle from the wall of the cabin. His hands were shaking, but he gripped it tightly, his mind racing with the knowledge that whatever happened next would change everything. He glanced at Tala, who was standing in the doorway, her eyes wide with fear. She had heard it too. "It's time," John said quietly, his voice low but steady. "Stay inside. Don't make a sound." John opened the door just enough to peek outside. His breath caught in his throat when he saw them. Riders, at least 10 of them, coming toward his farm. They were Apache warriors, their horses galloping steadily, their faces grim and determined. Tala had been right. The Apache were here. The days that followed were quiet, though John couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled in his heart. He had always been a man of routine, but now his life was suddenly filled with uncertainty. The girl, whom he had learned was named Tala, had begun to heal. Her injuries were not as severe as they first appeared, but she was still weak and fragile. Her once wide, fearful eyes had started to soften, and she began to speak to him more often, though she still spoke very little. Tala had told him very little about herself or how she had come to be in such a dire situation. She was evasive when he asked questions, only telling him that she had been separated from her people during a raid. She had run for days, hiding from those who sought to hurt her. John knew enough to understand that she was likely fleeing from a violent conflict, but he didn't press her. She didn't want to speak of it, and he respected that. John kept her presence a secret, at least from the nearby settlers. He knew that if word got out about an Apache girl being on his property, there would be trouble. The settlers didn't trust the Apache, and many viewed them as enemies. John didn't share their view, but he also knew that such a situation could easily spiral out of control. One afternoon, John went to the creek to fetch water, as he had done many times before. The sun was high in the sky, and the air was warm, with only a light breeze to stir the leaves on the trees. The sounds of birds and insects filled the air, creating the peaceful atmosphere that John was used to. But today there was something different. He felt as though he were being watched. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up, and he instinctively looked around, scanning the surroundings. His heart skipped a beat when his eyes landed on something in the distance. He couldn't see clearly, but it looked like a group of riders on horseback, moving fast and steadily toward his farm. They were too far away for him to make out details, but he knew what it meant. John's first instinct was to run back to the house, but he paused. If these were Apache warriors, they could easily surround him before he had a chance to escape. He wasn't sure if they were looking for Tala or if it was a coincidence, but the last thing he wanted was to face a confrontation with them. His mind raced. He had to warn Tala. He had to make sure she was hidden before they arrived. John quickly grabbed the water pail and rushed back to the house. His boots kicked up dust as he sprinted, and his breath came fast and shallow. When he reached the door, he threw it open, calling out to Tala, but there was no response. Panic rose in his chest. He ran through the small house, searching every corner, but she was nowhere to be found. "Tala!" he called again, his voice rising in urgency. Still no answer. John's heart was racing. He knew he had to find her before the Apache arrived. He bolted out the back door and ran toward the small woods behind the house. He had no idea where she could have gone, but he had to find her. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the land as John searched. He called her name over and over, his voice growing hoarse with fear. His mind raced. What if she had tried to run? What if she was in danger? Then, as he pushed through a thicket of bushes, he saw her. She was standing in a small clearing, her back to him, staring out toward the distant hills where the riders were approaching. John could see that she was trembling. "Tala," he called again, his voice softer this time. She turned to him slowly, her face pale and drawn with worry. "They're coming," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "They know I'm here." John's heart sank. He didn't know who they were, but he knew that it could only mean trouble. "The Apache?" he asked, though he already feared the answer. Tala nodded. "I don't know how, but they're coming for me. They will not leave without me." John felt a chill run through him. His thoughts raced. What should he do? Should he try to hide her? Should he send her away? But he knew that no matter what he did, the Apache would eventually find her. They always found their own. "Can you run?" John asked urgently. "Can you escape?" Tala shook her head. "They will find me. They always do." John didn't have time to think. He needed a plan. Quickly, he pulled her into the trees, urging her to move quickly and quietly. They had to get back to the house and prepare. But just as they neared the edge of the woods, they heard it, the sound of galloping horses. The Apache were getting closer and fast. John's heart pounded in his chest as he grabbed Tala's arm, pulling her toward the house. They made it back, to the barn where John quickly hid Tala inside beneath a pile of hay. He covered her with a blanket to conceal her, though he knew it wouldn't be enough to completely hide her if anyone looked closely. John then ran to the front of the house and stood near the door, pretending to be calm, but his nerves were on edge. His worst fear was becoming a reality. The Apache were here. John didn't have much time. He had to think fast. He couldn't let them find Tala. He had promised her safety, and he intended to keep that promise. As the horses drew nearer, John took a deep breath, preparing himself for whatever would come next. He didn't know what the Apache wanted, or what they would do when they found out he was sheltering one of their own. But one thing was certain. He was about to face the hardest challenge of his life. The sound of galloping horses grew louder as the Apache war party neared John's farm. His heart thudded in his chest, and he could feel the weight of the decision he had to make pressing down on him like a heavy stone. He knew they were coming for Tala, the girl he had sheltered, the girl he had promised to protect. John stood just outside his house, trying to appear calm, though every part of him was on edge. He could hear the thunder of hooves getting closer, and in his mind he prepared for the worst. He had no idea what the Apache would do when they arrived, but he feared the worst. The settlers didn't trust the Apache, and if they knew that John was harboring one of their own, it could spell disaster for him and his farm. John's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of horses coming to a halt. He straightened up, trying to steady his nerves. He had no choice now but to face them. He hoped against hope that his words would be enough to spare his life and, more importantly, to spare Tala's. As he stood at the front of the house, he saw them, Apache warriors mounted on horseback, their faces grim and their eyes fixed on him. There were at least a dozen of them, maybe more. Their faces were painted with tribal markings, their clothes made of animal skins, and they rode with the air of people who were used to taking what they wanted. They were here for Tala, there was no doubt about that. The leader of the group, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a long black beard, rode ahead of the others. His eyes were sharp and his gaze locked onto John with a mixture of suspicion and authority. "Where is the girl?" the leader demanded in a low, growling voice. His words were clear, though his accent was thick. "The Apache girl. She is here, we know it." John's heart raced, but he stood tall, not wanting to show fear. He knew that any sign of weakness might make them see him as an easy target. He swallowed hard, then spoke, his voice steady despite the fear gripping his insides. "She's not here," John replied firmly, though inside he was praying that his words would be enough to send them away. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I've seen no Apache girl." The leader's eyes narrowed. He didn't believe him. John could see it in the man's face. The Apache leader was no fool. He had likely been following Tala's trail for days, maybe even weeks. The fact that she was here under John's roof only confirmed his suspicions. "You lie," the Apache leader said, his voice growing colder. "We know she is here. We will find her." John's mind raced. He had to think quickly. There was no way to hide Tala now. If the warriors searched the house and the barn, they would find her. and if they found her, it would be the end for both of them. But then a thought struck him. Perhaps there was a way to make them understand. He stepped forward, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. "I did not take her in to harm her," John said, his voice calm but firm. "I found her injured by the creek. She was alone and she needed help. I couldn't turn her away. She's hurt. She's been running from someone, and I don't know who, but I swear I meant no disrespect." The Apache leader studied him carefully. John could see the man's eyes flicking toward the barn where he knew Tala was hiding. The leader's gaze softened, but only for a moment. "You have risked much by protecting her," the leader said, his voice low and measured. "Do you understand what you have done? You are a settler. Your people have taken our land. You have taken our lives, and now you shelter one of our own." John nodded slowly. He knew what he had done. He had made a choice, one that could very well cost him his life. But he had done it out of compassion, not out of any desire for trouble. He just couldn't turn his back on someone in need. "I know the risks," John said quietly, "but I couldn't let her suffer. She is a human being, and no one deserves to be abandoned in the wilderness." For a long moment, the Apache leader said nothing. The rest of the warriors waited in tense silence, their eyes flicking from John to each other. John could see the conflict in the leader's eyes. The Apache code of honor was clear. They valued strength and loyalty above all else, but they also respected bravery and honesty. John had given them neither strength nor loyalty, but he had given them honesty, and now it seemed that honesty was enough. At last, the Apache leader spoke again, his voice softer than before. "She is one of ours," he said, "but she is free now. You have done her a kindness, and for that we will show mercy. You will not be harmed." John's breath caught in his throat. He had expected nothing less than a fight. But the leader's words brought a sense of relief he had never thought possible. The Apache warriors would leave him in peace. But there was more to come. The leader glanced over his shoulder at his men, then turned back to John. "We will take her with us," he said. "She belongs with her people, but we will not harm you. We honor those who show mercy." John's heart fluttered. He had feared the worst, but now it seemed that the Apache had granted him a rare gift: mercy. He looked over at the barn where Tala was hiding and felt a pang of sadness. She would be leaving, but perhaps this was for the best. She would be with her people again, and she would be safe. "Tala," John called gently, his voice steady. "It's time. You can go home now." Tala stepped out of the barn, her face pale but determined. She looked at John for a long moment, and he could see the gratitude in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Thank you for saving me." John nodded, his heart heavy with the knowledge that he might never see her again. But he knew that he had done the right thing. He had protected her, and now she would be free. The Apache leader nodded once, then turned his horse around. Without another word, the warriors began to ride away, Tala following them on horseback. John watched them disappear into the distance, his heart both heavy and relieved. The danger had passed, but it had left him changed. He would never forget the girl he had rescued, and he would always remember the mercy the Apache had shown him that day. Days passed, and the peace that had followed the Apache warrior's departure was unsettling for John. His life had returned to its usual quiet rhythm, but something felt different. He had saved Tala. He had kept his promise to protect her, but the weight of that promise still lingered in his heart. He couldn't stop thinking about her, the girl he had rescued and sent away. The fields were the same, the animals needed feeding, and the sun still set in the same place every evening. But John knew that he would never be the same. His simple, solitary life had been shaken, and now there was a change inside him, a change that he couldn't explain. John spent his days working on the farm, trying to push the thoughts of Tala from his mind. He kept to his routine, but he found himself staring at the horizon more often, as if expecting something, as if waiting. But no one came. Then one morning, as the sun rose behind the hills, John heard the sound of a horse's hooves. He froze, his heart leaping into his chest. Was it the Apache again? Had they come back for something? Or someone? He quickly stepped outside, his boots crunching against the dirt. He squinted against the morning light, and there, in the distance, was a rider approaching. It was a solitary figure, riding a horse with a steady gait. As the rider drew closer, John could see that it wasn't an Apache warrior. It was Tala. John's heart skipped a beat. He couldn't believe his eyes. She was here, back at his farm, riding alone with a look of determination on her face. She wore the same clothes as before, but her posture was different. More confident, stronger. She slowed her horse as she approached the house, and John stood there, stunned, unsure of what to say. Tala dismounted, her eyes searching his face, as if looking for something, perhaps forgiveness or understanding. John took a hesitant step toward her, his mind racing with questions. "Tala," he said quietly, his voice catching in his throat. "What are you doing here?" Tala took a deep breath, her shoulders straightening as she looked at him. "I've come back to thank you," she said, her voice calm but firm, "and to tell you that I won't be going back to the tribe." John was taken aback. He had expected her to return to her people, to be with the Apache. He hadn't thought she would want to stay in the world of settlers, especially after everything that had happened. "I don't belong with them anymore," she continued, her gaze steady. "I thought I did, but the Apache, they're not my people, they're not my family. They have their ways, and I have mine." John didn't know what to say. He had done what he thought was right by sending her back to her people, but now she was here choosing a different path, a path that included him. "I don't know what to say," John murmured. "I thought I was helping you by sending you back. I didn't think you would want to stay here." Tala smiled, a small but genuine smile. "You helped me more than you know. You saved my life. You didn't just protect me. You gave me a chance to live the way I wanted. I can't forget that." John felt a surge of emotion, a mix of relief and something deeper, something he hadn't expected. He had grown fond of Tala during the time she had spent with him. He had cared for her as though she were his own family. And now, seeing her here, standing before him, he realized how much he had grown attached to her. "You don't have to stay if you don't want to," John said, though he found that the idea of her leaving made his chest tighten. "This is your decision, Tala. You've already done more than enough by trusting me." Tala shook her head. "I want to stay. I want to learn from you. I want to know what it's like to live in a world that's different from my own. I want to see what peace looks like." John felt a wave of warmth spread through him. The idea of teaching her about his life, about farming and the simple pleasures of living off the land, was something he had never imagined. But now, the thought of sharing his life with her, of having her by his side, felt right. "I can teach you," John said, his voice steady. "It won't be easy, but we can do it together. You'll learn what I know, and I'll learn from you too." Tala nodded, a look of quiet determination in her eyes. "Then we'll start tomorrow." The days that followed were filled with change. Tala began learning the ways of the land, helping John with the crops and animals. She worked hard, her spirit growing stronger with each passing day. She adapted quickly, using the skills she had learned from her own people to help John in ways he never expected. Her knowledge of tracking, survival, and the natural world was invaluable, and she proved to be a skilled hand on the farm. John, too, learned from her. He saw the world through her eyes, gaining a deeper understanding of the hardships she had faced. Her resilience inspired him, and he found himself growing more patient and thoughtful in his work. As time went on, John and Tala grew closer. They shared stories of their pasts, their hopes, and their dreams. John told her about the life he had lived before coming to the farm, the people he had known, the challenges he had faced, and Tala spoke of her tribe, the loss of her family, and the struggles of being torn between two worlds. Though their backgrounds were vastly different, they found common ground in the simple things, the quiet moments spent together, the joy of watching the crops grow, the satisfaction of a hard day's work. And over time, John realized that he had found something he hadn't even known he was looking for: peace. True peace in the company of someone who understood him, someone who had fought for survival just as he had. Tala had come to him as a stranger, lost and afraid. But now she was no longer a girl running from her past. She had found a place for herself, a place where she was accepted and valued. And in that place, John had found a new sense of purpose. Together, they had built something lasting, something more than a farm. They had built a life filled with hope, hard work, and understanding. And so, as the seasons changed and the years passed, John and Tala continued to live and work together. They faced challenges, of course, but they faced them side by side, knowing that no matter what happened, they would always have each other. It wasn't the life they had expected, but it was a life they had chosen. A life built on kindness, on understanding, and on the simple belief that no matter where you come from, you can always find a way to build something good.